Defenestrate. I should have looked that up first. By Renee Branum. Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. I've got a few more recent reads for Booker eligible books. I'm not trying to go through the entire list because that would be impossible. I'm in Canada. A lot of the books, I would say at least 10 there are, that I'd like to read that are solely in the UK or thereabouts. And I'd have to order them and buy them rather than get them from the library. First, let's go with Emergency by Daisy Hildyard. I gave this 1 star. I DNF'd it. It was very brutal for me. I got 25% in. This is what's being dubbed a modern pastoral, which basically, think of a normal pastoral, which seems to be, I have not read them before, so feel free to correct me, but it seems as though it is a coming of age centered on a farm in which she is interacting with the natural world in a very like nature-esque way. Like when I read Pilgrim to at Tinker Creek, similar stuff where she is going off investigating certain aspects of the ecosystem that are surrounding her, and it's informing how she thinks about society, about her own personhood, and about her family, etc. And it's, other than that, very plotless. Like you could think of each of the times that she interacts with a certain animal as a plot beat, maybe, but there's no overarching thing that I could discern at 25%, except that this has been inverted into a kind of like dark pastoral theme in which things are a little bit off kilter, a little bit surrealistic, because she is telling the story from the future during COVID, ostensibly at least. She is like at home and kind of in like a dark place, and so that is tinging how she is viewing her childhood and changing things into a dark, surrealistic aspect of it. However, I just didn't care about the character at all. I didn't have anything to grab onto. The dark aspects, when they occur, are slightly interesting, and the natural writing, like the actual prose work, is very strong. I just could not find anything to grab onto that I could actually care about, because I guess I'm just not into pastoral. It's the first thing that I've ever tried. I generally am fine with nature writing that I've tried anyway, but maybe that's not actually true. I don't know. But yeah, it just feels like nothing is constantly happening. Next, I read The Perfect Golden Circle by Benjamin Myers. This I got off NetGalley. Also, Emergency is already out in the UK, but not quite out. It's August 2nd, I believe, for North America, if you're interested in that. Perfect Golden Circle is already out here. I'm not sure about the UK. I assume it would be if it's eligible already, but you never know. This is a 4-star book that was really interesting. It's, again, not much of a plot-heavy book at all. It's about 2 guys in the 50s, I think, in the UK who are going around doing crop circles. So it posits that, you know, the hoax or whatever was generated by crop circles originates with these counterculture people who are making these intricate designs that are, you know, very hard to figure out how they are created, apparently. And they're doing so to incite thought and counterculture type stuff, basically embedded into the world and into the mythos of Western culture, which, judging from now where we are, they, you know, if that is true, they definitely succeeded at it, because crop circles are something that I grew up with, knowing about and positing about and being fascinated about. And it has definitely incited a lot of thought, polarized discussion about, as far as like aliens doing them to, you know, hoaxes to a whole bunch of different stuff. But it centers 2 guys who have like a strange relationship, I guess. Like, they're definitely not one of the normal men. One is a Vietnam veteran, and the other guy sees like these visions, and that's what he is creating, these intricate maps and circles and patterns about that they enact. It takes them a very long time. They're trying to not get caught, and that's the primary conflict of the book, basically, is they go, like, each chapter they go out, they do a design, will they or will they not get caught, which is not super interesting, but during that you get to know more about them, more about their pasts, why they're doing this thing, and they're just interesting characters, very beautiful natural writing, which is probably why conjoined with Emergency, I didn't care about Emergency, because I had the natural language that I really wanted in Perfect Golden Circle with something far more interesting paired to it already. I don't know. But it's very short, very punchy, doesn't overstay its welcome, gorgeous prose work. Again, nothing much happens, but it definitely is good at making you think about ideological perspectives. The characters were interesting enough. The actual dialogue was fine, not stand out. It was far more interesting and definitely a unique and novel concept that I hadn't been aware of before, so I gave it 4 stars. Next, on audio, I did Love Marriage by Monica Ali, and Ayesha Dharker is the narrator for this book. I gave it 2 stars. I did not DNF it, even though sometimes I wanted to, but I didn't think it actually ended up working in the end. It is a semi-intricate, I guess, look at a family. There are multiple casts and characters, so it's kind of epic in scope. It feels more like a soap opera, though. It's very like short scenes that play out and then it dips out. It didn't feel particularly literary to me in terms of like its handling of the actual characterization, nor the actual framing of the story, which is interesting. It felt, yeah, like a very unusual read. Not even something that I could compare to commercial fiction either. But it is very cinematic. There's not a lot of description. There is a lot of like fast character work with fast scenes, except that the plot beats are very much reoccurring. It becomes interminable, basically, because they end up playing out the exact same scenes over and over and over and over. One character is even at a psychiatrist, and those themes, even like, there's like a little bit of meta humor with it, where the psychiatrist is very like annoyed, basically, with his own patient, who, yeah, is like having trouble coming to terms with what is going on with him. He is ostensibly, at least, hooked on sex. You know, he's got a sex addiction and he's trying to interrogate why that is. Another character is getting married to a man who is the sex addict, and she, for whatever reason, ends up having an affair as well. Then there's an intergenerational thing where like her mother also has secrets that are keeping from her, and she's also like maybe queer questioning, something happening with that, and her father is having health crisis. So it's a dynamic that spins off from these core characters, this couple basically, into all these different people, some of which are touched on very lightly. Some of them end up being like the core of the book, basically. But again, it's just so overwrought that it becomes very hard to empathize with these people, when it should be very easy, because the plot beats just keep getting driven into your head like a cartoon hammer beating you over the head with just the exact same notes over and over and over. The narration was quite good, though, which is a plus when you're reading something like that. I think it could have been cut down to like half the length of it and been super punchy, still made the exact same points. There is some good qualities insofar as it's a very different Indian brown people type of story than like the brother being radicalized is the number one go-to thing, it seems like, lately. These are very verisimilitude type problems, and some of them are really interesting in how strange they are, but they also feel like sometimes they're inserted because it knows that the core of the story beats with the drama is lacking, if that makes sense. So overall, it was just not a successful novel for me at all. Then I read Run and Hide by Pankaj Mishra, I believe. This was a phenomenal 5-star book, but you need to know what you're getting into, I think, with this. If you think of this as an Indian MFA book, that might give you kind of an idea. There's some meta intertextual qualities to it. It is trying to elucidate basically the new India notion, especially as it pertains to literature. It centers a kind of insufferable, at least in the beginning, man, well, throughout basically, man who is the sole boy in the family, which means the hopes of the family rest on him, etc. His dad is got a lot of issues, we could say. He's very prejudiced. He literally kills people of the opposite denomination in pre-New India, basically, like back before the names were changed in the cities type deal. He is not very kind to his mother. He's very ostracized. He's very disaffected. He goes to the India Institute of Technology, which is very prestigious, and he has no like real aspirations. Like, he's very blank slate character, which is off-putting because he has been through so much trauma, but it seems like that's how he copes with it. He sort of just shuts down, but he's like that for pretty much the entire book. And as we see him grow up, we see India kind of grow up as well, including the literature scene. There's an ecosystem of references for literature that build out. I could have used more or less subjectivity, I guess, in that area. Like, saying what the character actually thinks about the ecosystems is more valuable than just kind of name dropping the references usually, which is typical of a millennial novel. And basically, he's somebody who coasts through his life, allowing life to tell him sort of, or maneuver him more like, into what to do next. He doesn't assert his boundaries. He doesn't strive for a very particular goal, even though he would like to be a writer. He doesn't really try for it. So he's very like insufferable in that way. But he is definitely a non-protagonist protagonist. Like, it's about interrogating toxic masculinity, about interrogating the trauma of like the previous generation, moving on to the forward one, the hopes underpinning a character who is analogous to like a lot of patriarchal family dynamics being put on the elder male in the family, but somebody who actually has no interest in seeing the capitalistic notions of the family actually actualized. You know, like he just doesn't care about that. He thinks the caste system is wrong. He has no interest in making money. It's just more about interrogating the assumptions of that society, especially the caste system, and especially of like the fetishistic notion of Western culture towards India, than about supplying something with like a plot that is grooving and moving, or about a protagonist that is trying to like overcome their marginalization. It's just about like a mediocre guy, basically, which I thought was very novel and interesting, but will drive some people a little bit mad. The prose is absolutely gorgeous all of the time. It definitely compelled me to keep reading, even though I was very annoyed with the character all of the time, and it seemed like it was spinning its wheels at times before transitioning to the new part. It's in 4 parts, and each part is delineated by more or less a decade, you could say. Sometimes jumping time even further into different sections of his life where there is a new conflict, and he deals with it in sort of the same way, or does he, basically. And so I thought it was very effective. There's also a mystery embedded in it. There's an open letter in which he is writing this book to somebody who you don't know at the beginning, And so why is he writing this book? To whom is he writing it to? And why, basically, it alludes to circumstances in the future centered on these two other men that were in the MFA program with him. And their circumstances counterpoint to his own is the point of the novel. Whether they buy into capitalism or not, whether they become rich or not, whether they become intellectuals or not, as well as the mythos of India, as well as the pathos of like things like the Me Too movement, social politics, India being influenced very heavily by the West, and again the fetishization of India allowed to prosper, I guess, in literary fiction. So I think it's very clever. It's definitely not for some people because it is a very challenging book, I think. Even though it's very beautiful and compelling for me, even as I was reading it, I was very interested in the structural issues that it had, because what was issues became instead for me the point of the novel, because the structure actually communicates a lot of what the protagonist is unwilling to communicate to the author because they're so disaffected and unable to be emotionally articulate. There are like passages in this with paragraphs that are very chewy, very bored, or they become very monotonous and tedious when he's interacting with capitalistic people who are very annoying, but he becomes very granular in what is happening in order to piss you off because he is pissed off, but he can't say that he's pissed off because he's disaffected. So it's that kind of clever. It's gonna be either for you or not. Next, Defenestrate by Renee Branum. And this is a 3-star read, which was very close to a 4-star read at points. It's very novel, I think. It's about a young woman who, structurally, there's 3 timelines basically going on concurrently and linearly, but you have to figure out where in time they are occurring, you know? Different events within each timeline begin to situate where the other timelines are. It is about a family that is possibly ostensibly cursed. It goes back into a time of which in Rome, I don't even think it's like great-great-grandfather. It's like so far back in history that they don't even remember basically. But one of their ancestors was very jealous because a stonemason had hit on or impregnated that man's daughter. And so when he was working on a building, he was pushed from it. And ever since then, throughout history, people have been falling, sometimes to like minor degree, sometimes to their death, basically. And so it's like a thing that is passed down, this tale that is passed down in history throughout their lives. And it's sort of infected this girl who is like a twin and kind of so consumed by this story that every framing, every perspective that is formulated in this book centers it, so much so that it is interspersed with factual information about people who were pushed from buildings, or out of windows, I think is the very specific term for Defenestrate. And some of it is very fascinating, but it is definitely overwritten for me. I think this could have been severely truncated, like this could have been a novella for me, and I think it would have been really punchy. But the problem is, again, this is a plot beat heavy book in which the plot beats occur over and over and over with the exact same point. And so it, again, is like hitting me over the head with the point of it. There is like an ending that it comes to that is really nice and kind of like perfect, yet it has not that much to do with what the buttressing of the actual story is attempting throughout it, which is even further frustrating for me. Basically, in one timeline, she is drinking at a bar and telling these stories to these men about defenestrations and her past and stuff like that, and she's insufferable during those moments. In another one, her twin brother Nick has fallen himself, and she is trying to figure out if it was like a self-inflicted thing or not. And this seems to be sort of the present day. That is the story that continues through, and then kind of like elucidates what everything was going on about, basically. And then in a different timeline, I think it'd be too much of a spoiler possibly, so I won't mention. But yeah, it's just a book that the prose work is definitely serviceable, but not particularly interesting. Like the specificity and diction was not specifically there for me, so I was kind of like hooked by the actual premise of the book and the conceit. But then because it kept dragging on, I was just not here for it after about the halfway mark. And then it starts getting really interesting in the last 50 or 60 pages. So know that going in, and then see where you land, I guess. Next, I will talk about Anthem by Noah Hawley. I think that's how you would say that. Hawley, yeah. Narrated by Shiromi Arserio. This is a strange 4-star book that is also not going to be for many people, I think. It is a current picture of America, if you will. It takes place like 10 seconds in the future. It takes place a year, exactly maybe, from the time that the insurrection in America occurred. And there are meta interjections from the author contextualizing different historical aspects that he interjects or injects into the actual story. So it's a very strange book in some ways. But the fictional daughter of the person who is basically the head of the Sackler family, essentially, is devastated when his daughter commits suicide. She peppers her wall with oxycodone and takes it and overdoses. And then a mass epidemic of young people committing suicide is taking place due to the things that are happening in the planet and their anxieties about it, basically. The brother of the girl who was killed is sort of the main protagonist, I would say. He goes to a mental facility in which he's being cared for this anxiety, and then absconds, basically, with somebody who's a prophet and the other main character of the book, basically. And they're trying to essentially thwart his father in some ways, like cripple his empire of paint, basically. Even as this epidemic occurs, it becomes wildly absurdist in that, like, every single kid is at risk for committing suicide now because it's an epidemic, and a civil war breaks loose in America, and the two sides are battling out, even as this kid and this little group are trying to effect some small manner of change or get out of the circumstances as it becomes dystopic and post-apocalyptic. So it is very timely. It is very intense. It is, for me, I really liked that it was a 10-second in the future thing in which it acknowledges all of the anxieties of my generation and those younger than me. It feels kind of like validation because it transposes the anxiety into anger, basically, and I thought it was very effective in that manner. Because it devolves into an absurdist angle, but is buttressed by the meta component of the author interjecting all these real life things that are so absurd but true. It feels like the absurd component makes sense within the absurd world, and something I hadn't seen before, basically. It definitely is going to be triggering for some people. It is certainly apoplectic. It is not interested in holding your hand. It wants people to obviously wake up and doesn't want to apply satire to it, which I wholly agree with. Generally, when I read satire about these political things, it does not galvanize me or provoke any emotion in me, and generally I don't find them funny either. So this is sort of like the absurdist book for me, basically, but will definitely not be for some people. Americans, it will be a polarizing reaction to, I think. Seek the Singing Fish by Roma Wells. This is a fantastic 5-star book. It takes place in Sri Lanka at the height of the civil war that was occurring there. And it is about a young girl, basically a coming-of-age story, separated into 4 parts. And it is sort of like childhood, loss of innocence, and basically going into all the different things that you probably don't know about Sri Lanka, but it is tied to a natural component in which she is describing the natural world in such granular detail that it's like she's very intelligent and learned about these subjects, basically, like to such a fine degree that when she likens these specific creatures in the jungle that she is aware of to different people that she knows, it's not quite anthropomorphic because she maintains the separation, like it's not surrealistic at all. Yet she identifies the traits of certain humans with creatures, and that enables her to like sort of understand people better and build an ecosystem around her where she is able to transcend some of the very intense conflicts that she has to deal with and navigate throughout her life. And so her knowledge is sort of her power kind of deal, but also her ability to apply the ecosystem, I guess, around her, even in urban environments, is the thing that enables her to subsist and like figure things out and make sense of the world. So it's like the through line of the novel, and I thought it was fantastic. It then transitions into latter life, basically, where I think it would be too much of a spoiler to give away what happens. But just know that it's a very bleak book at times, but if you keep going, her force of nature and personality and perseverance always come back, and it's a book that always keeps you guessing as to what will happen. Like, something really bleak and dangerous and intense is happening, especially since she's embroiled in a conflict that is literally a genocide, basically. And if you know anything about Sri Lankan history, then you kind of know what will happen, maybe. And so as her life continues on, even past the conflict, it transitions into very, always like, maybe ambitious, I guess is a way to put it, literary circumnavigations. Like, as soon as you get a beat on what you think the story is doing at a literary perspective, it takes like a little bit of a zag and it's no longer that story at all, which I appreciated, because especially in part 2, it is intense and bleak and hard to keep reading at times. But then because it transitions so seamlessly from part to part, you learn to trust the author and you just go with it, and it becomes a phenomenal read, I think. So I gave it 5 stars, absolutely recommend it, great stuff. And that's where I'll stop with the Booker stuff today. I have another book, but I think this is going long, and I'll just bunch it into the next round. If you have any thoughts, feelings, opinions about these books, put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what everybody else is reading, especially if it's like a Booker thing that I haven't heard of, something like that. And otherwise, I will see you next video. Bye.